Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. So today I am going to draw and paint a brown bear, and I'm going to paint it with gouache as a request from my friend Jo, who's always a great support in chat. So I thought, I haven't used my gouache in a while. I use the white occasionally when I'm doing a painting, but she requested a bear and to see it in gouache. So I am going to start to draw this bear. I'm literally going to start with shapes. So I'm going to start with the round for his face, and then his face and his body, 1, 2, are pretty much the same length because the angle he's walking towards us, and his head and his body are 1.5 deep. So 1.5. I'm just going to come straight down the front there to start to add shapes in. I can adjust and readjust and change perspective and change directions of things if I need to. Now his head and his leg is just a little bit longer than his length of his head. And he's walking in grass, so you can barely see. And the same with this leg, but now I've got that leg, I can use it to measure off. Come down and down the back there. Now his back leg comes off the round part of his body like that, and they're a very downhill built animal. Like they go from high to low. They're very, very strongly a downhill built animal. Now I can start to add change shapes a little bit and add a little bit of detail. So I'm going to pop his ears on. I can see that ear's just there, and his ears are quite large, so his ears are about half the width of his head. So they're actually quite large and rounded at the top. And I can add a little bit more. He's got a little bit of fatty bits behind his ears, so I'll add a bit more. Actually, I'm gonna bring that ear a bit forward, a bit more that way. There we go, like that. And he's got a little bit more fur around the back there. Now, from his ears to his eyes is the same length. So I'll just put a mark there and a mark there. That's where his eyes are gonna go. And then the same, or a little bit, tiny bit less, from his ears to his nose. And his nose is actually more in, he's looking sort of back. So pop his little nose there. I can draw these eyes in now. And his eyes are sort of squinty. And he's a very furry bear, this one. He's a beautiful big woolly brown bear. And his eyes, the corner of his eye, this corner is in line with the ear. That corner is in line with that ear. And his nose, the outside of his nose is actually in line with there. So I've got to bring his nose over a fraction more, like that. And I can erase those lines as I go. Now I'm going to pop some of the fur patterns, just so I've got a guide where I put my colour, where there's lights and darks. And he's got quite a narrow nose, actually, quite a narrow nose, like that. And then he gets into his big woolly cheeks. And I can get rid of that initial circle pretty quickly. I'm just going to draw fur in now. He actually is looking a bit like a wolf at the second. I'll draw fur in now, but once I soften him up and add the fur texture, he'll start to look a bit better. Okay, so add his big woolly legs. And that is basically, like, that's a very simple way of drawing. You just measure everything against everything else. And I'm just going to scribble in fur texture. The gouache will completely cover the pencil. Gouache is an opaque kind of watercolour. Or it's a water soluble medium. So it's a good one if you work indoors a lot like I do and you haven't got a very well ventilated area. And it's easy to clean, it's easy to clean up, easy to store. I just have it on my palette all the time ready to go. And I can show you my palette. I've had this palette like this for years now. So that's my gouache palette, and my gouache all dries up, but the second you add water to it again, it wets up and it's all usable again. Some people like to use it fresh from the tubes. I tend to just have it stored and pull it out whenever I need it. So I'm just going to add some grass. So there is our bear drawing. It's pretty much done. I'm going to erase the little pencil lines that I've put in. I'm going to fuzzy up the fur at the back of his head there. Come around here, I've got to erase that other pencil line as well. But that's about him done. I've got to round up these ears a little bit, round them up a little bit, because they are much rounder than I've got them. I've got them a bit pointier. There we go. Right, so that's the bear basically in. So I'm just going to use my same watercolour brushes. I've got my water set up here. The same watercolour brushes as I use, and I'm still going to use the same technique. You don't have to. You can go dark to light with gouache because it's opaque, so you can't see through it. Once you put it on, I do treat it more like watercolour. So I'm just going to grab my colour chart that I made of these so that I can see the colours a bit more clearly. I make colour charts up for all my palettes, so I know what's where and what colours mix to make what. So I've got my gouache colour chart here. So now I'm going to go in, first of all, with a light tone. I'm going to use yellow ochre. So like I said, I've already re-wet my gouache. So I'm going to go straight in, wet my brush as well. I've got to scrub quite a lot onto my brush to get any lift off, because it's dried quite a lot on my palette. Keep going, keep at it. It's a very soft brush. I probably need a stronger brush. So now I'm just going to start to add a very thin layer of gouache, yellow ochre, onto my bear. And you use the same paper, all the same stuff. I'm using the same brushes. And I'm just going to paint around anywhere. I don't need to leave any lights because I can add the white back in. This is the beauty of gouache, where you can't with watercolour. You can go back over and lighten things up with gouache if you want to. And I mix them exactly the same way. Like I'll make my greys exactly the same. And these are, the brand is Sennelier, and they're a lovely gouache. I've got a mixture of Sennelier gouache and Schminke gouache. I like both equally. So I'm doing it actually very watery. You don't have to with gouache. You can do it thick, you can do it thin. I still treat it like watercolour because that's my happy place. And once it's dry, even 10 years down the track, if I took a paintbrush to it, I could re-wet it and lift it off the paper. So it's much, you've got to, when you frame it, when you frame gouache, you've got to have it. So it can't, it's got to be in a dry area. It can't be in a humid area because the water will damage it. Any moist air will damage it. So you've got to keep them, like get them framed professionally under proper glass. You can seal them, I think, but because gouache is porous, it will crack. If you seal it with you've got to get a really good quality sealant if you're gonna seal it. So now I'm going into a bit of burnt sienna, which is a slightly stronger brown, a bready brown. I think I actually really need to go a stronger brown. I'm going to go burnt umber. I need a stronger brown. There we go. That's a bit better. So a bit of burnt umber, sorry, over the top. And I'll start to take that down into any of the darker areas that I see. So yeah, I use it off, so it's been dried and it's on a palette. But you can just take it straight out of the tube and it's much creamier and much thicker. If you use it direct from the tube, it is much thicker. But for convenience, I always have it on my palette, just because it's much more convenient for how I work. I like to be able to grab things and start straight away when I'm inspired. So come down here. And I do a lot of sketching, and it's easy. I go to zoos and stuff, and I do a lot of drawing outside, and it's just much easier to have my palette all ready to go. I just chuck it in my bag and off I go. So I'm just going to add little dark, this is still just burnt umber around the eyes. I can pop that onto his nose area as well. Come around this back part of his eye. And these are just the first few layers. I will build up a little bit more. like getting a bit more texture, a bit more fur texture, but I'm quite happy with that so far. I'm going to go onto the ground now. The ground is a mixture of browns and greens, so I'm going to go a bit of raw sienna, because you can see a bit of brown through the grass. So I just pop that on there. I'm not going to worry about a background. I'm not going to do trees. I'm just going to do the bear. And now I'm going to also go in with a bit of olivey green. I've got olive green on my palette here, so I'll grab a bit of that. And just blob that on. Add some greens in. And at the end, when it's dry, I'll go over the top and add some grassy texture. But I'll just take that in there like that. Pop it up sort of more between his legs as well. Because you can, I can re-wet this. I can change this a lot. I can get thicker and darker as I go. Right, now I'm going to go onto his legs again, and I'm going to mix up my burnt sienna and my cobalt blue. I'm going to make my grey. So burnt umber, cobalt blue, and you can see that's quite thick. I think you can see that in my camera. I think I've got it in camera. Hang on. Yep, I've just got it in camera. So burnt umber, cobalt blue makes a stronger grey, and I'm just going to drop that in. Actually, I'm going to use my thin brush for this, and I'm going to start to add a little bit of fur texture, and it will mix with the under, because it's, it truly relifts, it truly re-wets all the time. You can end up lifting the colour underneath, so I've got to be a bit careful, because even when the bottom colour's dry, it will re-wet. It will fire up again and start be able to be moved around the page again. So it can be a little bit tricky that way, when you've got to be careful if you put different colours together, because they can mix. Once you add water, they can mix on the page. But I'm using just a lot of browns, so it's not going to make much difference. But now I can add the fur textures and some of these darker tones around and underneath. And any gouache, I've heard good things. Watch reviews, lots of reviews on gouaches. There's a lot of reputable artists that can get, you can get hold of some really quite affordable gouaches that are cheap. Like, I've heard great things about the Hemi gouache. I've never used it, but I've heard great things about it. I haven't tried it. I tend to stick with artist quality, like museum quality. What do they call it? It's got a name. I tend to stick with, it's got a name. I've gone completely blank on what it's called. But it's artist quality, so it'll last 100 years. On the right paper, treated well, it will last a lifetime. Where some of the cheaper ones fade. So you've got to keep the, like, when you frame them, hang them in a nicely lit with a UV protected glass kind of thing, so they don't get sun damage. Okay, so that's nearly, so you can see I'm just adding streaks for fur. This is quite a simple sketch. Quite a simple sketch. And gouache is fun because it is a little bit more opaque. It's a little bit, the thicker you go, I don't do a lot of thick work, but if the thicker you go, you can make it look really gutsy and lovely. But I'm so used to working light that it's just a habit. So now I'm actually going to go back in. I'm going to go back into my reddy brown. I've got a nice reddy brown here. I'm going to get that on my palette. Actually, I'll clean that yellow ochre up there. Get that reddy brown. It's taking quite a bit of scrubbing to get that to activate, but that's okay. And I'm going to take a little bit of this reddy brown up and around his forehead and his face, also down this side of his nose. I need it to be a little bit more red. And then I'm going to pop that in just down here, just to add some more reddy warm tones onto his fur. He's got mixtures of reds, browns and golds. So I started with yellow ochre because that's the highlight colour. I've gone into the dark brown, And now I'm going to go onto his little nose, and I'm actually going to use a black for his nose. I've got a black gouache on the palette because I can go over as well, and I can go over this with any colour it'll cover, because it's gouache. It's very forgiving. You make a mistake, you can go over it. There we go. So I'll pop his little eye in. Doesn't matter if that's, let's move that around a little bit. And I'll darken that up again, even in a minute. I'm going to grab some more green. I'm going to go back into my olive green, and I'm going to add some grass texture. Just some stalks of grass. Like that. And you can see the underneath colours, which is really lovely. You can see that completely covers those pencil lines. Right, I'm going to go back into his eyes, and I'm going to try and get a bit more thicker black onto my brush. A little bit less water, because you don't need a lot of water with gouache. You don't need a lot. I use a lot because I'm a watercolour girl. Whoops, days. Okay, let's pick that up. That was still a bit too damp, but that's all right. I don't actually mind that. I don't actually mind that effect. I'm just going to pick up, and gouache, because it's gouache, I can literally scrub that off and it'll disappear. I don't, anything that splashes like that, not a problem. You can almost pick it completely off the paper. So your paper goes back to pretty much white. Just got to make sure I've got a bit of clean cloth. There we go. And again, I'm going to do the same thing, because he's only a little drawing, so he doesn't need, you know, all the fine detail, just enough to contrast, to make contrast. Like that. And you can see that lifted that underneath colour almost off. Oops. And I'm just going to pick that up again. I'm going to have to be patient. Not my forte. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to let that bit dry, because you can see how that's lifted right up. And I'll just go back onto these other areas and add some darker brown. I'm going to go, I've got a bit of Van Dyke brown here, and I'm going to go in with a little bit of Van Dyke brown. It's a lovely brown, lovely brown. And I'm going to add some fur texture on. I'm back in Van Dyke brown, and I can actually add that completely onto that leg, because that leg is a very dark shadow at the back there. He's got super dark shadow underneath. This is where you need to remember your lights to darks. It really helps with dimensions, proportions, making things look real and alive. If you get your colour perspective right, it really helps a lot. Alright, so I'll continue onto that little leg there. I'll come up his hip. You can see that he's got shadows on his hip there. And he's quite dark in the front, but I'm just going to add fur, like furry stripes. Again, I'm just using Van Dyke brown, and come under his chin here, like that, into these two darkest dark areas. And his ears are super dark, like that. That is super dark. I'm going to go back around this edge of his eye, and I'm going to add a little bit onto his muzzle where his mouth is, just like that. I'm going to wait. I'm being patient. I'm going to wait, and I'm going to get a bit of thick black paint on my brush, and just gently pop that into the eye area. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm happy with that. Okay, so now I'm going to add just a little bit of white just at the top of the eyes, just the teeniest dot. You can barely even see it. I'm gonna, that mixed with the black. That's okay. That turned it to a grey. I've got to be patient, let it dry. There we go. Pop the black back on there, and I'm going to leave that alone. I'm actually going to leave it alone. And I'm going to go back to his nose, where I just added that bit of a highlight. and it made it a nice light grey. Because you see on the picture his nose does have quite a nice grey, light grey top. Right, I'm going to let that dry for a minute. Righto, so he's dried off a little bit. I'm going to carefully go back and drop a little bit more black into his eye. I've got to get my brush clean, exactly the same as I would with watercolour. I'm just going to pick that excess. I've got too much water on his nose, so I'm just going to pick that up with my dry brush, just like that. And I'm going to go back with some pure black and pop that onto there. And I'm going to leave that alone because I don't mind that effect. I don't mind that effect at all. The only thing with gouache, if you use it, is it mixes with itself. If you're not really careful, it can mix with itself. So I'm just going back and cleaning up a little bit where I've made a little bit of a mess, just around under his eye. I'll just change the shape of his eye a fraction, just a fraction, like that. There we go. Just go underneath, and as that sort of washes down, I'm just going to pick it up with my brush, just very gently. Stop it from going any further, like that. And I actually don't mind that. It's created that fur texture around his eye. So I'm going to leave that. I'm quite happy with that. And I am actually going to call that done. As far as a gouache sketch goes, that's a fun little gouache sketch. So I'm going to sign it down this bottom corner. So Joe, I hope you enjoyed this video. I did this just for you. Thank you so much for the inspiration. And anyone else who's hanging out watching, thank you for being here. I'd love it if you click like and subscribe, click on the bell icon. That way you'll be notified when I release a new video, which will be most days. I'm hoping to, release videos most days. So thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you next video. Okie doke. Bye.